Hey everybody, this is Robert from Black Belt Gaming. I hope you're doing well. I thought I would make another entry into my Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition series. I've got some ideas for several videos in mind, but I thought I would get started by talking about a couple of monsters from the Monster Manual and a couple of memorable encounters I had with those monsters. Well, let's talk about the Harpy. The Harpy actually might be a pretty cool monster to talk about here in October. It can be pretty creepy. Harpies are chaotic evil, and they're not the brightest of creatures. Their intelligence is low. Their armor class is 7. If you were playing more modern versions of the game, that would be about a 13. They have 3 attacks. And if you're going by the first edition AD&D rules, that can be pretty rough because even if you win the initiative roll against a Harpy, if you only have the basic 1 attack, she's still going to go first. She's going to go first with one of those claws or talons, and then the initiative roll will probably determine who goes next, and then she'll follow up after those attacks with a final attack using some sort of weapon. So that's the 1d3, 1, 2, 3, and a 1d6, or 1 through 6. That 1 through 6 is a club or a dagger or a short sword or whatever else she might have in her hands. So the 1 to 3 and 1 to 3 are her claws or talons. But it's the special attacks that make a Harpy interesting. First of all, Harpies can sing, and it's kind of this enchanting song. Adventurers nearby need to make a saving throw versus magic, or they're drawn to this music. And then upon coming closer, I think it's upon the Harpy's touch, she can charm them. And they also have to make another saving throw. And this is very similar to like the charm spell. So once a character is charmed, the Harpy would usually then torture and abuse them and eat them. So you definitely don't want to get close to these things and falling under their spell, or you're kind of doomed. So Harpy's hit dice is 3, not the highest, but if they can get you charmed, you're in trouble. So let me talk about a memorable encounter I had. Probably the first time, actually it was the first time I ever encountered one of these in a game. And I think it was the first time I even learned what a Harpy was. Well, this story goes back a long time, when I was still a beginner player in Dungeons & Dragons. So we're talking maybe 1982, 83. And I just remember that the party of characters, we were on a road, and I can't remember where we were traveling or why, but it was a road sort of in the countryside. There were trees on both sides of the road, forest on each side, and it was late in the day, probably around twilight, maybe dusk, when the sun is going down, and there's still some light in the sky, but it's not black dark yet. And as we were traveling along, some of us were on horses, some of us were walking. I think as a low-level character, I think I was walking along. And the Dungeon Master told us that we heard this sweet song coming from the side of the road. And then we heard a beautiful voice kind of laughing and giggling, but it was in a pretty way, just like a happy woman who was singing to herself. Behind the screen, the Dungeon Master made a few die rolls. And then he told us that, I can't remember if it was 1 one or two members of the party, I know it was at least one, got up or dismounted from their horse and started approaching the woods, because he had to find out what the source of this song was. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but I think the dungeon master was making saving throws for us behind the screen, and this character must have failed. So he was being drawn toward this magic. So the dungeon master didn't ask us to roll a saving throw out in front of everybody. He did it secretly behind the screen, so we didn't even know what he was rolling. Well, this character started to approach the woods. And this was the dungeon master running the game that I told you about before. He kind of introduced me to Dungeons & Dragons along with some other players, but he was the DM that could make some pretty tough rulings sometimes. And those rulings, although pretty harsh, could really bring the world alive and really make some of your actions have consequences. And so this was kind of one of those situations. The player was approaching the woods. Others of us were a little unsure what was going on. Some of us wanted to guard the horses. I think that was my duty as a low-level character. And one of the higher-level characters started to follow. He dismounted and started to follow along with this character who was being drawn towards the music. As soon as he neared the edge of the forest, the dungeon master told us that the singing stopped. And in that kind of twilight sky, where we were just seeing some light reflecting off the clouds, we saw the outline of this bird-like creature, and it was bigger than a bird. It was medium size, and we heard the flapping of large wings, and then swooping down straight towards the character that was drawn towards the woods. This creature attacked, and it had the mixture of a body of a kind of a vulture with the top half of a ugly woman, and almost hag looking. And this thing attacked and came in, and this was a surprise attack on the character. And she hit him first with those claws, and he rolled his attacks. And there were a couple of things back then about armor and how armor class worked, and then if you had on a helmet or not. This particular character at that time was not wearing a helmet, and so he was more vulnerable. His armor class wasn't as good as the rest of his body. That's an old rule. You can check those things out in the books about whether you have on a helmet or not. So it wasn't that difficult for this creature to strike at his face, and he was hit twice with these claw attacks. I can't remember, to tell you the truth, if there was a third attack that followed up with some weapon. There may have been a club, I'm not sure, but I do remember those claws hitting, those talons. And he went down. He was maybe a second level character, but his face took about 5 points of damage, I think. And I can't remember again, like if there was the follow-up attack with a club or something. I don't remember if there was more than one of these harpies. I just really am focused on, my memory focuses on this one attack. And as the battle went on, the harpy was eventually killed. But the character that was hit first was damaged in the face, and the DM ruled that because he wasn't wearing any sort of headgear, any sort of helmet protection, that his charisma score was permanently lowered by 2 points. And I remember the guy, pulling out his pencil and erasing his charisma score and bringing it down a couple of points. And, that was harsh. His character lost 2 points permanently from one of his ability scores. And so that was my first encounter with a Harpy. And there was only one that I recall, but it was a pretty brutal encounter. And it was a great way that she used her singing attack, or her singing special attack, to lure someone over. And then, I guess, according to the dungeon master's thinking, he wasn't going to enter the woods alone because someone else was coming too, so she just decided to swoop in and start attacking, thinking that we might be easy prey. But some of the higher level characters ended up taking her down, I think with some bow shots or something. But that was it. That was our encounter with the Harpy. Well, the next creature I thought I would talk about, and I think it happened on this same adventure, was a Wraith. It was the first time I had ever encountered a Wraith in Dungeons & Dragons. Let's talk about the Wraith first. The Wraith has an armor class of 4. So we've got several points better than the Harpy. And its hit dice is superior, so it's got a 5 plus 3. And different than the Harpy, this creature only has 1 attack, and it does 1d6 damage. That doesn't seem so much. Remember, the Harpy had 2 attacks plus a 1d6. But what's terrible, absolutely horrifying about a Wraith is that they have an energy drain. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But special defenses, this is another thing. Only silver or magic weapons can hit it. So normal weapons are not going to do anything to it. This is a very intelligent creature who is lawful evil. Energy drain. Energy drain means that if this thing touches you, no matter how much damage it does, if this thing hits you with its attack, you're going to lose a level of experience. You're going to go down a level. And you're going to even hit this thing, you need silver or magical weapons to hit it. So it's pretty dangerous. When I was with the party this time, we were still on this same road that must be cursed. We encountered, I think it was only one. We encountered a Wraith. And I remember the GM or the DM describing it as this sort of ghostly, misty figure with these glowing eyes appearing to block our path. And we immediately got engaged in combat with it. And, arrows were shot, the combat started, and we weren't doing any damage to it. In a previous video, I talked about how important equipment selection was for us during the character creation process. Part of the old style for us was what you carried and what you could use. Those resources were so important, whether it was magical components, what kind of clothes and equipment you carried, all of these things. How many torches you had, did you have a means of lighting the torches? All of these things were quite important. So as this battle started, normal weapons weren't doing any damage, and some of the other higher level characters knew that they needed to get out their magical weapons to battle this thing. So some of the higher level characters started to really get up and close and start fighting this thing. One of the higher level characters was hit, and the DM told him, "You just lost a level of experience." And I remember the guy looking down on his character sheet and saying, "Okay," and he erased and he was marking some things down. And the other friend, who was my age, he looked at me and he said, "That's right." He said, "If this thing hits you, you're dead." He said, "If this thing touches you, your character's gone." and that was terrifying, because I'd had this character through several adventures now, and I was still level 1, but I was getting attached to it. And so when my turn was coming up in the order during the combat, I remember sort of staying back by the horses towards the end of the line, and I wasn't sure what to do, so I kind of was unsure, and the DM, if I didn't tell the DM what I wanted to do, he just said, all right, you're cowering. And he just kept it moving. He kept it moving. He didn't let me sit there and talk about half a dozen different plans. And so one of the characters, this was probably metagaming, but one of my friends said, do you have anything silver? And this was a great moment because I had actually chosen in the character creation process, or in the equipment when we were gearing up for this quest, we were told we might encounter some undead, and I had bought some silver arrows. I can't remember if I had a crossbow or a bow, but I had some silver tipped projectiles, and I thought, yes, I do. And so I pulled it out and I got it into my, let's say it was a crossbow. I put the bolt in my crossbow. And as the battle was going on, I remember the highest level character had probably already lost 2 levels of experience in the battle, but they were damaging this thing with their magical attacks, a combination of spells and magical weapons. It finally came around the turn for me to act again, and I took a shot with my crossbow with this silver bolt, and it hit. I hit the target. Now, I don't think silver weapons do full damage. They do hit it, but I think they only do about half damage. So I rolled the damage and told him what I got, and he did the math. And then the amazing thing was that I remember the DM just sort of swung his arms back like he was doing a backstroke in a swimming pool. And he just made this sound with his voice. And he said that my arrow, or my bolt, hit this wraith, and in a flash of smoke and light, he said this thing vanishes and disappears. And basically what I found out was that my little cowering character who fumbled out and got his little silver bolt into his crossbow and fired with his nervous hands actually had the killing blow on this wraith. And so that was so awesome. That was my first time really contributing to the party in a dangerous combat situation. And so, I mean, absolutely, the credit goes to the guys who brought him down as far as they did with their weapons and magical attacks. I would have been dead otherwise. But it was really cool to have my one little bow shot get the killing attack. And that just further drew me into the game and thought, yes, even as a low-level character, I can contribute something. So that was my first time encountering a Wraith. It was just a very straightforward encounter. I mean, it was just a battle on a road. But a very cool moment. I still remember to this day. Alright, I think I'll end this video here after talking about the Harpy and the Wraith. Hope you enjoyed the video. Be interested to hear any comments you have about those two creatures. And I guess I'll catch you guys later for for some more AD&D.